Reaction out of Western Canada to last week's election outcome was swift and at times fierce. The hashtag Wexit trended on Twitter for days as some outraged voices in Alberta and Saskatchewan saw the Liberal minority win as the final straw and cause to pursue a separatist exit from Canada. For voters in Ontario who took some of the wrath, it can be a bit puzzling. With us to explain the Western state of mind, we welcome, in Calgary, Alberta, Martha Hall Findlay, formerly the Liberal MP from Toronto, now President and CEO of the Canada West Foundation, and Lindsay Tedds, Professor and Scientific Director, Fiscal and Economic Policy at the School of Public Policy, University of Calgary. In Edmonton, Alberta, via Skype, Monty Solberg, former Conservative Cabinet Minister from Alberta, now a Principal with New West Public Affairs. And here in our studios in evil Upper Canada, Andrew McDougall, Professor of Political Science at the University of Toronto, Scarborough, and we hasten to add, not the Andrew McDougall who used to work in Prime Minister Stephen Harper's office, the other Andrew McDougall who is at University of Toronto, Scarborough. Great to have you all on TVO tonight for this conversation. And before we get started, I got a bunch of graphics I got to get through here because we want to set the table for the discussion to come, and I'm going to describe these in some detail for those who are listening in on podcast. And who can't see these charts. So let's start to bring these up, Sheldon, and we'll just go through them as we can. All of Canada's population, almost up to 38 million people now in the province of Ontario. We're north of 14 million people. In the province of Alberta, 4.3 million people. You see a large difference. Let's go through the GDP numbers for all of Canada. And again, this one's going to take some describing. You see 3 bars leading from the years 2009 to 2018. The tallest bars, obviously, are Canada's GDP. And the bars, even with the Great Recession, the bars go up and up and up. They generally trend upwards. Also in the province of Ontario, they generally trend upwards from 2009 to 2018. You can see the size of the Alberta economy relative to the size of the Canadian economy. In spite of the wealth, it is not as large as maybe some in Ontario think. And there have been dips in that line, of course, as the oil and gas industry suffers through what it has suffered through. Now, let's keep going. We'll take a look at another chart here. This one is median family income. The Ontario lines and the Canadian lines are pretty much synonymous, and they actually trend up. The Alberta line, you can see family income, median family income in Alberta is actually much higher than in Canada in general or in Ontario in particular. And again, there is that dip in the line you can see towards the latter years. How about the rate of unemployment? Let's check that out. In Canada as a whole and Ontario as a whole, the numbers started higher in 2009 at the beginning of the Great Recession, but then essentially trend down and they mirror one another. Look at that Alberta line. Huge dips. Right, going down towards 2012 as the unemployment rate dropped, but then spiking up big time in 2016 and now starting to come down a little bit now again. Again, dramatically different from either Canada or Ontario. And one final graphic, just before we get everybody else involved in this, sales tax. Yes, we have a healthy sales tax in the province of Ontario, the harmonized sales tax, which is, of course, the combination of the retail sales tax of the province and the goods and services tax of the federal government, clocks in at 13%. Alberta only has the 5% GST. There never has been a provincial sales tax, and there isn't one now. Okay, with all of that in place, Lindsay, Tedds, let me get you to start this off here. What do you think the numbers say about the economic health of Alberta relative to the rest of the country?
Well, first I'm going to correct you. Alberta did actually have a sales tax for less than a year back in 1936, I think it was.
I knew as soon as the words were out of my mouth, I'd have to take them back. But okay, I should have said in our lifetime.
In our lifetime. Okay. So I think what you want to take away from these numbers is that Alberta is, well, we have a population of 4.3. Our population is actually very, very young compared to the rest of Canada. We also have very large family sizes out here compared to the rest of Canada. And so when we look at the population, it's a very different population than in the rest of Canada. Is our income higher here? Family income? Yeah, actually, it was one of those things that I got quite surprised about. I've lived here now for a year and a half, and that was something that did quite surprise me. But when the economic downturn hit here, which was the result of the oil collapse, what you are seeing is the people who are hit the hardest from this are young people, young men with a trade background, where the income was quite a bit higher than you would see with that category of worker in other provinces. And as the economy is coming back, those workers are really struggling to find employment and to find that income again. And so it's a big adjustment that's going on here based on the education and the age of people. I mean, our unemployment rate of people under the age of 25 is almost 20%.
Wow.
It's very, very high.
Let me get your colleague Martha Hall-Finley there to amplify on that, Martha Hall-Finley, in as much as those charts tell us a bunch of things. Is there something that those charts don't tell us that you think people in Ontario need to know about the nature of Alberta today?
Two things. One is that there's no question Alberta is still a good place to live. There's no question it's a strong economy. Things are going pretty well relative certainly to other parts of Canada and certainly other parts of the world. So one, it can't be seen as, oh, woe is us in terms of Alberta. That's actually not the case. And this brings me to the second point. It is a real sense of lack of ability for self-determination from an economic perspective. It's the lost opportunity now that's being seen in Alberta. It's not a complaint of things are so terrible. It is what we're seeing. So this morning we heard Encana is now picking up fully and leaving to the States. This used to be a very strong, proud Canadian company, is now going. It's one of a lot. So we're seeing here a lot of investment that's either slowing down to a trickle or stopping, and even worse, a lot of Canadian investment that is going elsewhere. So when you see the legislative activities of the last couple of years, Bill C-69, which is now the new Impact Assessment Act, Bill C-48, which we refer to as the part of one coast tanker ban, they're seen very much as hindering the opportunities for the West for its own economic prosperity over the next while, not right now. There's a real concern about what's going to happen over the next few years.
Monty Solberg, anything you'd want to add that we should know here in Ontario, not captured by those charts?
Well, the charts don't capture the degree to which there is potential to create jobs and wealth for all Canadians. And Martha touched on this. You know, we need to remember that Canadians from across the country have come to Alberta over the last 20 years to build a career and build a life. That's no longer as easy to do as it once was. In fact, you know, the Encana announcement today really punctuated the sentence when it comes to how things have changed. We're seeing this more and more often. All kinds of assets and talent and jobs are moving typically to the U.S., where they have a vibrant oil and gas sector with pipelines. And of course, should we shut our industry down, the Americans would be only too happy to pick up the slack and provide all that oil and of course not do one thing to limit greenhouse gas emissions.
We should add that Encana is not only leaving, but they're leaving their name behind as well. The Canada part of their name, well, the company's changing its name, so you won't even see that Canada part reflected in the new name. Andrew, anything you want to add to what you've heard?
Yeah, I mean, your perspective on those numbers depends as much on where you are in the country. Like anything else in Canadian politics. If you're in Alberta, obviously, it looks like the province is going through a very rough time, and you're experiencing that, and it's hard sometimes, I think, to come to grips with that. If you're in other parts of the country, though, Alberta is still looking pretty good, and it's still a destination for a lot of people to go when they're looking for jobs and opportunities. And they're looking around at their provinces, and they're saying, you know, we wish we had Alberta's problems, but we don't. So, you know, I'm not surprised that there's a bit of a national divide on Alberta these days.
Lindsay, maybe you could make a corollary for us here. People who've lived in the province of Ontario for more than a decade will well remember how many hundreds of thousands of manufacturing jobs this province shed during the course of the Great Recession. And I wonder if there's and before even before that, I wonder if is there a corollary to be made with what's happening in oil and gas in Alberta?
Well, actually, yes, because while the layoffs that started happening in 2015 were the result of the economic contraction with oil prices and what have you, while companies now in oil and gas are hiring. What they are doing is taking this opportunity to make sort of long-term adjustments. They're moving to AI, they're moving to robotics, they're moving to data analytics. And so what manufacturing went through with the 2008 financial crisis, the oil and gas industry is now using that opportunity to make those adjustments. So, I mean, the rule of thumb we're using here in Calgary, where 10 people used to be hired, 3 are coming back, and at least one of those people that are coming back have skills that weren't represented in the oil and gas industry before. We're actually seeing the exact same thing going on in Texas. They have shed about 30 to 40,000 jobs, and those jobs that are coming back are also in the AI and robotics. There is an opportunity here, but it is a hard adjustment to make, as Ontario knows, and I'd like to point out also Atlantic Canada with the cod fishery collapse.
Sure.
These are hard adjustments to make, but this is the reality.
And if I can, Steve,
Please.
lot of those jobs, AI and robotics, a lot of the effort now is, in fact, in reducing greenhouse gas emissions, too. So the level of innovation and technology toward more and much greater environmental sustainability is actually pretty exciting, and that's not a story that gets told terribly often either.
Follow up with this, though, Martha. The job losses that, of course, the province of Ontario experienced, that I guess some of the Atlantic provinces experienced, Lindsay, with that fishery reference, and now, of course, oil and gas. It's a lot of men and a lot of young men who are being adversely affected by this, and I wonder whether that puts added oomph behind some of the dire headlines that we see. What do you think? That's for Martha.
Oh, well, every time somebody like that is affected, if you're a young man or a young woman who's been working in the oil sands, and you have a family, their whole family is affected. I mean, it does filter through. And if I can, the biggest difference to me in seeing these numbers, and why, back to the point of this discussion of real frustration in the West, is that these job losses have been preventable. These job losses have been happening in great part because the industry can't get its product to global markets. The United States is our only market. So not only the oil price drop in global terms, but the differential between what Canada can sell its oil for to the Americans is significantly less than what it would be able to get on the global on the world market. So there's that. So that's a real frustration. And the other thing is, if you can't get your product to market, then you can't actually expand, you can't grow your business. And those are also jobs that are not happening. So the frustration isn't just that there have been job losses. The frustration has been very much, and it didn't just happen with the election. This has been building over the last number of years, a sense that decisions are being made in Ottawa that are preventing the industry here from actually achieving its full potential, so that those job losses are seen as preventable. So we could have those jobs.
Well,
that's a big part of the frustration.
We'll certainly follow up on that in the course of our conversation. Monty, I wonder if you'd help us with this. I certainly remember when Peter Lougheed was premier. We're going, my gosh, it's like 48 years ago now that he was first elected and stayed in until the middle 80s. We certainly thought the idea was we're going to make a lot of money from oil and gas. We're going to put it in a heritage fund, and it's going to help diversify our economy going forward so we don't have to be so reliable on this one sector. How much of that has actually happened?
Well, some of it's happened, not enough. There's only about $17 billion in the heritage fund. There should be a lot more. Premier Klein put a lot of emphasis on paying down debt and getting the province to the point where it actually had a balanced budget. We have to remember a lot of the money out of Alberta goes into transfers to other provinces, $20 billion, a year, $600 billion since 1960. So let's not forget that. A tremendous amount of that money has gone to the rest of Confederation and continues to provide, of course, opportunities for people everywhere. And finally, 36, the economy used to be about 36% oil and gas in Alberta a generation ago. Today it's 25%. Part of that, of course, is the recession in the oil and gas sector, but part of it's also the rest of the economy has been growing and creating new jobs. So the idea that somehow Alberta is just a one-legged stool really isn't correct. I think it is a big frustration, Steve. I just have to say in response to some of the questions that have been asked already that there is no acknowledgement of all those transfers that come from Alberta. And strangely, it seems, the federal government seems intent on ensuring that those transfers can't continue by not providing policies that allow us to move oil and gas typically to tidewater and other markets.
Well, I think there seems to be good consensus here that it's time to start talking about the election results, because I have a feeling you all want to put something on the record here about that. Andrew, I'm going to start with you. I'm sure our friends in Western Canada were not the slightest bit surprised that the Liberals were wiped out in Alberta and Saskatchewan. I wonder if you were at all surprised by the fact that, unlike when the current Prime Minister's father was in power and lost all his seats out west, at least he was getting a quarter of the votes. The Liberals got 10% of the vote in Saskatchewan. Did that surprise you?
It wasn't, the headline takeaway wasn't hugely surprising. I mean, there was a strong decline in Liberal fortunes out there. But if you take a look at the map today, it's not all that different from maps that we've seen in previous elections. And in fact, it looks a lot like what you would have seen in the 1980s, with the Bloc in Quebec and the Conservatives very strong in the West, and the Liberals doing well in the cities and in Ontario. So the fact that they didn't get a single seat in Alberta or Saskatchewan was interesting to me, but it wasn't beyond the realm of possibility.
Monty, can you follow up on that in this respect? There may be people here in central Canada who thought and think we helped buy them a $4.5 billion pipeline to help the economy. Why didn't that buy them any goodwill on election night? What's the answer to that?
Well, I think the answer is that the reason they had to buy a pipeline is because they delayed and made it very difficult for the company that owned it at the time to see a path forward, see a way to make money on it, because there were so many hoops to jump through. Remember, one of the first things that the new government did when they came to power was, first of all, put a tanker ban in place on the West Coast, and secondly, they immediately put in place a 3-month delay on Trans Mountain so they could review what had already been reviewed by experts for months and months and months. And then, of course, as we got closer to the election, everything got delayed again. And there were all kinds of the usual suspects who were protesting, taking the thing to court. And it became extraordinarily frustrating. And I think maybe the most important thing of all, Steve, was there was absolutely no significant support from the government of Canada in the sense of the Prime Minister coming out and going to bat for the pipeline and for the oil and gas industry in places like British Columbia. Instead, it was just let BC go ahead and protest this and not stand up for Alberta. And that was extraordinarily frustrating, I think, to Albertans to not see any leadership from the federal government.
I mean, the record also shows that when you were in government, when you were in Stephen Harper's government, no pipelines got built then either. It's hard to build pipelines in this country, isn't it?
We built 4 pipelines, Steve. We built 4 significant pipelines. Alberta Clipper was one of them.
I guess I should have clarified. Not the ones we're talking about today.
Well, no, so we had one proposed, Northern Gateway Pipeline. Ultimately, that went to the federal court, and we were told we had to go back and redo consultations with First Nations before we had a chance, of course, to do that. Ultimately, the election came, and the tanker ban was put in place, and Northern Gateway, as it stands today, is probably dead. Should that tanker ban be removed, that could change. And Trans Mountain hadn't even gone through the process yet. We were in the midst of the process when the election came. So, I think it's fair to ask questions about it, but I don't think it's fair to say that we didn't get it done. We were in the process.
Understood. Martha Hall-Finley, maybe as somebody who obviously used to represent a central Canadian riding when you were in Parliament and who now lives out west, you can help our audience understand why the purchase by the federal government of the pipeline didn't seem to help them at the ballot box at all.
Yeah, and really to echo what Monty said, there's nobody out here that wanted the federal government to have to buy the pipeline. Don't get me wrong, once the private sector had thrown its hands up and said we can't do this, it was very important that the federal government do that. But that was by no means the preference of anybody. People wanted the private sector, the industry, to be able to actually build the pipeline and whatever other pipelines or means to get product to market. So I know it's frustrating because there's an element of how come they're not grateful that, we bought a pipeline. It has to be put into the context of nobody really wanted that to happen. It would have been far, far better if the environment that we found ourselves in allowed the private sector to proceed. And there's no question, to Monty's point, attitude is also really important. There is a sense all the way through that the federal government did that only because it ultimately had to. There was no sense of support for the industry. And then, to talk about the alienation and the frustration right through this election campaign, we had all of the leaders but one, all of the party leaders but one, including the sitting prime minister, saying things like, we're out here, we're here to fight the oil industry. That kind of rhetoric is not lost on people. And so when you add all of those things together, people are pretty frustrated.
Would it be like saying we're here to fight the auto industry in Ontario?
Well, and if I can say, the Alberta and Saskatchewan oil and gas industry, you take just those two provinces together, that industry contributes more than 4 times to the national economy that the entire auto sector does. Huh. So yes, and then you throw in SNC-Lavalin and all of the hoopla about, what do we do to save this country? And Canada's departure this morning didn't even, register. This is where it's really important that people around the country understand the disconnect and why it's so frustrating for so many people.
Right. Lindsay, Ted, help us with this. From what I understand, putting a price on carbon is essentially a market solution to an environmental problem. And conservatives like market solutions. In fact, there are lots of conservatives today who think putting a price on carbon is not a bad idea. Patrick Brown, a former Ontario Conservative Party leader, liked the idea. Preston Manning's come around on it. Why do you think it's been such a tough sell in parts of Western Canada?
Well, nobody likes paying taxes here. Sorry. Tax is a 4-letter word in Alberta. And it also, I think it got too wound up with all of these other sentiments that we're talking about here, that it seemed like it was a direct attack solely on the oil and gas industry. I mean, it's not, but it's a very emissions-intensive industry. And so those two factors get tied together. And I think it's really unfortunate. It's a nice, clean, simple, administratively easy tool. You're not picking winners. You're not picking losers. We're seeing with the tier proposal from the UCP that there's clear picking of winners and losers under that program. And so it would be nice if we could move away from that, but it's you can't sell it, and it's lost.
But don't forget, Alberta actually did have a carbon tax before anybody else did. Mm-hmm. That gets lost in the conversation too, unfortunately.
I want, Andrew, for you to put your academician's hat on right here and help us understand whether or not you see any potential middle or common ground on pipelines, on carbon pricing. Is there anything here we can coalesce around?
I think that's what Trudeau's been trying to do. If you take a look at public opinion surveys about pipelines, and if you ask Canadians whether or not we should build them, generally Canadians say, yes, we should do that. But if you ask them whether or not we should live up to our environmental commitments at the same time, and they'll say yes to that too. Mm. And I think Trudeau, up until now, has been trying a little bit to be all things to all people, and trying to, support the oil industry on the one hand while also living up to our environmental commitments. But I think the last election showed that that's more difficult than it looks, and that may not be a line that he's going to be able to walk going forward. So whether or not there's a middle ground that you can coalesce around, if there is, I think the Trudeau Liberals are looking for it, but they haven't found it yet.
It's pretty elusive.
Yeah.
Monty Solberg, what would you and what would your fellow Albertans like to have heard from the Liberal leader during the course of the campaign that you think maybe could have made a difference?
Well, I think we would have liked to have heard that he believes in a balanced approach to resource development and ensuring that the environment is preserved and climate change is addressed. And there are ways to do that. In fact, I would point out that the Premier of Alberta in writing a letter to the Prime Minister the other day, did ask for a conversation about climate change and indicated he's willing to work with the Prime Minister on those kinds of measures. But of course, we also have to continue to develop our oil and gas resources. And in fact, in doing that, to some degree, we can actually address climate change. As the Premier has pointed out, and others have pointed out, the development of liquefied natural gas ports in British Columbia using British Columbia and Alberta natural gas can actually be used to reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions around the world, especially when they replace coal facilities in places like China. So there's no question that there's some direct ways to address all of this. I would also note that, as Martha pointed out, we have had a price of carbon since 2006 in Alberta. So we have been addressing these things to some degree, not enough. But the new proposal being proposed by the Premier would actually reduce Alberta's emissions by 18%, according to a lot of independent studies. So, we're striving to do our part. We're doing more than just about anywhere else in the world, and we will continue to get better. We would like some recognition for that, and we would like to see, Alberta and Canadian oil be an export around the world, because it's actually the best way for us to reduce overall emissions and ensure the highest human rights and labor standards by ensuring Canadian oil supplants foreign oil wherever that's possible, including in Eastern Canada.
Martha, I suppose it was probably inevitable that some catchy Twitter slogan was going to emerge from the election, given the results and the wipeout for the Liberal Party in much of Western Canada, not British Columbia, but certainly Alberta and Saskatchewan. Not much left in Manitoba either. Wexit. This whole notion of the West, not as Preston Manning said, once in, but many in the West want out. How seriously do you think the country should take these feelings of separation?
So just first, Steve, because Andrew didn't think that there was a way to find a common ground. I absolutely believe that there is. So I just need that on the record. There is absolutely a way for the federal government to recognize and work with the industry to reduce the footprint, to do all this technology innovation that's happening that's reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, already the Canadian oil sands oil is cleaner than now the average in North America. Well, why would we close what we're doing down so that we can allow California heavy to be the replacement? So there is a huge opportunity, and I'm really hoping that the federal government sees that and embraces it, because there's a real willingness out here for that to happen. Wexit is a really unfortunate term, no question. It was coined by a couple of people who, frankly, are not representative of what I see as the really serious group of people, real intellectual heft, real money, going into really looking at what the alternatives might be. This is, and Steve, you and I are old enough certainly to remember what had happened in the late 70s and 80s. Maybe I should have just said that I am old enough.
Martha, you're a year older than me. We both remember.
But this is worse. This is deeper. It's broader. And what I find really frustrating is that probably the more dangerous aspect of this is how little the rest of the country realizes just how bad it is. It's not whining. It's not, because Albertans don't have a good standard of living. It is very much a frustration of not being able to pursue economic prosperity, economic ambitions that the region has and feels are being frustrated.
Lindsay, what would you add to that?
Well, I mean, this is really tough for me, this talk about Alberta separation or Western separation. You might not know by my accent, but I am a British citizen. I've been watching my country being torn apart. It's very, I'm getting it now. It's very emotional for me to talk about separation. I just don't see any good come from it, but I understand what is there. We've been talking a lot about macroeconomic conditions. Let's talk about the human beings underlying this contraction that's going on in Alberta. Male suicides are skyrocketing and are higher than they've ever been. Social assistance caseloads in Alberta are at a level we've never thought possible. Domestic violence is becoming a huge plague in this province. And these are all interrelated with the economy. But these are human beings. It's human beings that are suffering. And to me, that was what was missing from the federal government, was thinking about these human beings and coming up with better policies to support them. EI did not help this province at all through this contraction that we're going through. And we need to have better policies in place that consider this level of contraction, that are targeting very specific kinds of people.
Monty, what's your view on the Western feelings of both separation and alienation at the moment?
Well, people are very frustrated, beyond frustrated, and in some cases, of course, are actually trying to organize separatist parties. So it's getting very real. The Prime Minister's own rhetoric is being used to break up the country when he talks about standing up to oil barons. But the reality is it's, a service worker, a oil patch service worker in Red Deer or in Grand Prairie who hasn't had a job for 18 months and is getting desperate. And that's really the crux of the thing. People are, there's a sense that there's absolutely no understanding, no respect, and or complete indifference to what's going on in Alberta and Saskatchewan. And so the natural response, of course, for many people is to say, well, if they don't respect us and they're not willing to do anything to try and help us, I guess we're better off on our own. And so you can go to any small town and every big city in Alberta, hear it in every coffee shop. It's there. People are saying it's time to leave. I would say that Albertans, as a federalist myself, we're lucky that we have a premier like Jason Kenney, who's so good at articulating the concerns of Albertans and channeling some of that frustration back toward the Prime Minister and the federal government. Now we just need to hope that there's someone there on the other end who's going to listen.
Well, of course, he's your former cabinet colleague, and I wonder how responsibly you think he's handled the rhetoric around all this. Some, of course, are accusing him of fanning the flames of separation with his rhetoric. What's your view?
Well, my view is that's not at all true. He's been very careful to say that he himself is a federalist. He's set up town hall meetings around the province to ensure Albertans do get a say. He wants to propose some ideas back to the federal government and amongst his colleagues across the federation, fellow premiers, to see if there's not some things that we can do to ensure that individual provinces have a bit more autonomy to address some of these big issues that we're all concerned about. There's certainly climate change, but the economy as well. And are there ways we can make some changes that will allow provinces to address these things, but all within Confederation?
Andrew, last minute to you on this issue of Wexit and how seriously we should take it.
Yeah, I mean, if there is this mushy middle that Martha hopes is out there, I mean, political leaders in this country have been looking at that for quite some time. If you look historically at Western separatism, it's been something that's nibbled around the edges of Confederation for a while, but it's really nothing new that people have talked about. There's no underlying nationalism in Alberta or in the West, either civic or ethnic, that you would be able to point to suggest that it's a realistic political project right now. What you tend to see much more often are protest parties that will explode out of the West at times of great stress. So you can think about the Progressives, you can think about the Social Credit Party, you can think about the Reform Party. It
is a wake-up call to Central Canada and the federal government, though, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is certainly a time of heightened tensions. There's no doubt about that. But, when you look at that history, you wonder if it's not more akin to the U.S. Democrats who sometimes say that they're going to move to Canada once a Republican gets elected, and they
never do.
And then they never do. And then they're very upset about the government until the next time comes around. So something may have changed profoundly in the West, but we would have to see a little bit more on that developing before we could say that it's actually happened.
Can I thank all of you for coming on to TVO tonight and sharing your views on this? Martha Hall-Finley, Lindsay Tedds, Monty Solberg, Andrew McDougall. Really good of you to spare some time for us on this brewing issue that we really do need to understand so much better. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thank
you, Steve.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.